introduce herself.
Thanks, Abby. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Valerie Lamb. I'm a colleague of Abby's, also in the Ethics and Compliance Department. My role is Anti-Corruption Compliance Counsel, as well as Risk and Compliance Programs Lead. So my responsibilities include managing the legal dynamic risk assessment activities that our team captures for the legal department as a whole, as well as managing the global anti-corruption program, which includes assessing, identifying, resolving relevant anti-corruption risks, and implementing appropriate controls and mitigation activities through coordination with global and regional stakeholders. And we can talk about that in a bit more detail as we go along. All right, and I think we're going to start with a polling question. All right. So what we're going to talk to you today is about the evolution of our risk assessment process from risk assessment to risk management, as Abby noted, and specifically as it relates to the legal, regulatory, and compliance risks. So what we wanted to do is start off with a framework question to understand what function manages your risk assessment and management activities for these functions. Insert your responses into the chat window, and then we can discuss that, and then I'll give you a bit more background about how Dell manages the program.
Just to let you know, chat has been disabled, it says.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Let's see. All right, well, we will continue then. Next slide, Abby. We'll talk about Dell's structure and see if we can get the chat enabled. Okay. So Dell's risk management framework has a variety of different levels of responsibility, of course. What we do is we have the risk management operations fall within our global audit and transformation team, which is within the overarching finance function. So the ERM team, the enterprise risk management team, is responsible for the corporate strategy for maturing the overarching ERM framework, as well as the digital risk assessment framework that we'll talk a bit more about now. That being said, they're part of a larger risk management ecosystem. So the risk management ecosystem includes a variety of functional areas, including legal, marketing, HR, and a variety of other business functions as well. The risk governance structure has various levels and lines of defense, as we call it, and it's comprised of multiple key stakeholders. Starting at the first line of defense is our business teams and their management of day-to-day operations and risks that come along. The second level of defense is our compliance teams, for example, which then go into the GAT, which is our global audit and transformation team, who is responsible for assurance activities. Then they roll up into our global risk and compliance council and enterprise risk steering committees, which are committees made up of executive leadership. What they do is they set the tone at the top, they monitor cross-functional risks, and they address emerging risks and escalations. And ultimately, they report into our board and audit committee. So within this structure, our ethics and compliance team, which is part of our legal team in general, what we do is we are responsible for managing the identification and the assessment and management of legal, regulatory, and compliance risks that get fed into this structure and ultimately rolled up for review at the executive level. So the digital risk management journey that I'll talk about today follows what's captured here on this slide. What we've done is we've adopted a digital tool to help capture the risks that are being identified. What our teams do is we use RSA Archer for the ongoing assessment and management of ERM activities. Prior iterations before we went on this digital journey consisted of snapshot in times reviews that were just manually input on a siloed review level across the organization. So what this does is this reflects not only the ERM journey, but the legal team's journey as well. So as you can imagine, for a process to work enterprise-wide, you need each function within the entire risk management ecosystem to adopt and apply the enhancements that eventually get rolled up. So as I previously noted, our legal team is one line of defense within the ERM framework. We were an early adopter and driver of the tool, And we've driven a variety of capabilities and functionality enhancements in Archer itself, which is now being used and leveraged by other functional areas. So what our efforts have consisted of in the past few years have been including alignment with the ERM framework, of course, while ensuring that what we use in the legal team for the tool reflects our needs. So what we'll do is we'll start with how we've processed this journey in the legal team, starting with the left-hand side is phase one. Structured data, of course, is critical to starting any sort of digital enhancement phase. What you need is to really understand what is the data itself, clean data, and then you can enable risk analysis as well as trending. That will then drive phase two with the creation of a governance structure. What we need to do is make sure that there's consistent use of the tool within each of the teams that are using it, so that way you can have value add reporting outputs. Going on to level 3 and phase 3, what then that takes is the fundamental data that is captured within the tool, but then looks at external sources to then give additional information about risk analysis and assessment. Creating KRIs for each relevant practice area, and then taking that to get a holistic view of what your risk is the ultimate goal. And we'll talk about each element of the details within each of the phases in a little bit with specific snapshots of the tool itself. All right, slide 4, please. Okay, this is our vision. The vision for the enhancements that result from this journey really benefits all levels of the risk governance structure. From the ERM side, there's the common taxonomy and framework. And what that does is it assists in capturing the risk data, as well as informing executive leadership team reports of risks so that you can have an enhanced analysis done so that you can really implement appropriate mitigation efforts. For our internal audit team, what this does is provides real-time agile assurance and awareness and shifts in the business risk profile, which then drives their audit roadmaps for their assurance activities. And then finally, each line of defense has a consistency in identifying risks and then efficiently managing those risks through documented mitigation activity. And then all of these enhancements really just drive operational excellence and risk insights that enable the creation of holistic views of our risk profile from the top level down. Next slide. So the result of implementing that vision is integrated risk management, which consists of a variety of elements. One, there's evergreen data. The business teams and the risk users within those teams utilize the tool to update risks on an as-needed basis or a set minimum cadence to ensure that it's continually current. It's not a one-and-done exercise on an annual basis. Ultimately, the information gets captured and leveraged to provide insights, improved efficiency, and enhanced stakeholder value. One of the key elements that's used is risk trending. And those types of reports get captured within the tool because we're able to see changes that are made with impact and likelihood for each risk that's entered. We're also able to link specific mitigation activities to specific individual risks. And that can then determine the effectiveness of mitigation activities as they progress, as they're implemented, as they're completed. We can then see, how does that impact the risk? Is it actually being effective in reducing either likelihood or impact? Is it maintaining status quo? Or even with those in mitigation activities being implemented, is the risk going up? Those types of risk metric capabilities really inform our risk profiles. And then, of course, the corresponding resource efforts needed to manage those risks. And then ultimately, the alignment of executive level ERM reporting of the holistic view of the risk really is the ultimate benefit. All right, next slide. So it's important to note that the enablement of these enhancements ensure that the risks are not reviewed in a siloed fashion. So this gives you a good example of how this can benefit the organization and the risk management process as a whole. So for example, with the integrated risk management process that we just went through, alignment between each of the levels of defense and the functions can occur on a regular basis. They can use a common language. So then the full risk picture of a particular region, for example, can be identified and understood by relevant leadership. So here you can see there's input into the tool by the relevant business functions. It will flag to say this business area indicated this risk. If a legal team member includes a risk for that region, then you can compile the two and have a discussion as to how they inform each other. And this gives you that holistic view of the risk as a whole. And then this can help drive better discussions at leadership levels. And then these conversations between legal and cross-functional team member just drive the appropriate mitigation activities that really will reduce the risk to the organization. And now I'll pass it over to Abby, and she'll discuss more in detail about the individual enhancements and capabilities that the tool is capable of.
Thank you, Valerie. All right, did we get the function working where you guys can answer another question now? Can someone test it for me?
Appears so.
It is working?
Oh, hold on a minute. Only to you all though. It's not to everyone though, if that's okay.
Directly to the posts.
Mm-hmm.
It's just to us. Okay. Well, maybe if we can get it working, you can let us know, but we're really interested to know, you know, who is using tools and who is not. I think as Valerie explained to you guys at the beginning, we literally used a PowerPoint slide where we put a dot on a heat map. And it was siloed, right? So legal may have done what they wanted to do, and finance done something else, and sales did something else. And then our audit team had to roll all that up together. And now with the use of Archer, we are able to do that in a systematic type approach. So we adopted the use of Archer, and Archer is a product of RSA, and RSA was one of our previous subsidiaries of Dell Technologies, but has since been spun off. But we do still utilize the tool itself. And we use it not only for risk management, but it's also expandable to be used for other type functions. Our privacy team uses it for a lot of what their needs are. So it's a very dynamic and robust tool, but the purpose of us using it is just for the risk management, and it enables us to be collaborative and have that one framework and governance around the whole process. And within the tool and the process itself, we as a legal team have kind of documented our roles and responsibilities. And this is something that we share with our legal team members who support the risk process at different levels. So as you can see here, we have a risk owner. So the risk owner is the legal senior vice president who's ultimately responsible for managing that risks. For the most part, we do have a one-on-one correlation between legal SVPs and risk. For example, you have one SVP that's over privacy, or one SVP that's over anti-bribery and corruption, but there's also some that may be more regional in nature. So we do have SVPs that own it from a regional perspective, but the ultimate responsibility is placed with the legal SVP that owns that global risk itself. So as Valerie was talking about in terms of collaboration with CCRs, there's also collaboration within the legal department with the global and regional and local councils that are the subject matter experts for each of those respective risks. So there is a lot of collaboration, and this tool really enables us to be able to do that in a really smooth process, which I can show you guys later. Then the risk owner assigns a risk lead. So that is delegated by the SVP, and they are responsible for oversight of that risk itself. And they, coordinate all, execution of, identifying the risks, and getting them in the tools and making sure that everything is, coordinated through that perspective. But there's also risk manager, which may be different from your risk lead, which is the subject matter expert who is responsible for identifying and assessing that risk. But it's all collaborative, right? They have to collaborate amongst the risk leads, the risk owners, and the local councils within region. And the risk managers are accountable to make sure that everything that's within Archer is accurate, it's input there timely. I can show you in a future slide how we, have dashboards that represent kind of the status of our risks and the activities that are supporting that. So they are responsible as a risk manager to solve all that. Oh, good. I see we're getting some answers to our survey. Okay, great. Risk leads do have coordinators, and they're not something that's identified in the tool, but they can, a lot of times our risk leads will utilize our paralegals to help them manage this process. Because sometimes it's, as you all know, ends of quarters, end of year, certain time periods, they're really, really busy, supporting our clients. So it's really important to have that coordination with other team members to help get these information input into the tool correctly.
And I see some chats coming in. It does look like there's a variety of different tools, from Excel to PowerPoint, the more manual efforts, to more digital tools like Qualtrics. So it seems like the audience here is on the same span of the journey that we've been on. Like Abby said, we also started out with the PowerPoints and the Excels, and now moving on to the Archer tool has been extremely beneficial for us. And we'll talk obviously more in detail about how exactly it works within our teams. But it's interesting to see the chats here.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yes. So here is our framework that we utilize within the legal department. So we have different levels of risk: level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. There's even level 5, which certain groups do utilize, but within legal, we just use it through the level 4. And that is actually something that's new. That's only been rolled out within the past 6 months. And we are just now getting heat maps, which I'll show you also at the level 4 level. So primarily we've been at the level 1, level 2, level 3 level. And I'll give you an example of what those look like. So level 1 is our top level risks, right? So for us, it's legal or regulatory type risks. And it's, the organizational unit that's responsible. You might have marketing, you might have sales. Level 2 would be like the clip down from that level 1. Legal risks are, plotted at this level. So you don't see a legal risk at the level 1, you'll see it at the level 2. So an example might be privacy, it might be trade, it might be anti-bribery or corruption at that level 2 perspective. And then level 3 would be something that supports that's that single click down from the L2. It may be global or it may be regional. The leading or the key risk driver determines where the level 2 risk gets plotted. And I can show you that in a future slide. And then level 4, that's used, we started utilizing that more to capture some of the regional ones that don't rise to the level of being a level 3 risk itself. And it helps to kind of highlight key hotspots, right? If we have, a hotspot happening in a certain country, we can highlight that as a level 4 risk and utilize that to drive mitigation activities or remediation activities that are necessary that are highlighted as a part of that risk. I can give you a great example of our level 2, 3, 4. So level 2 would be anti-bribery or corruption. A level 3 would be gifts and hospitality. And then a level 4 would be our high value, high profile events. That the bribery and corruption risk itself is owned by Valerie. And I'm the program manager for gifts and hospitality. So we work hand in hand on that. And then our high profile events might be a Dell Technologies World, it might be a Dell Match Play where we are providing hospitality to customers. So those are the kinds of things that we document in here and try to make sure we have controls in place to mitigate those risks. Any questions on any of that so far? feel free to put anything in the chat window. Valerie is monitoring that so she can speak up as necessary. Okay. Then it comes to our likelihood and impact. And as I was speaking about before, in the past, it was kind of like, let's just put a dot on a heat map on a PowerPoint slide somewhere. Not a whole lot of consistency among the different groups as to who, you know, did what, when, and where. So now we've got it tagged more from a threshold level based on impact and likelihood. And a lot of the questions that we do get is, well, not quite sure where ours falls, right? It is hard to come up with an impact and a likelihood. And we, as a legal function, and we're documenting the legal risks under that legal regulatory level 1, we want to make sure that these are only documented for the for that legal perspective. What are the fines or penalties that might come about if we were to breach a contract, or, you know, things of that nature. And that sometimes can be difficult to ascertain. So one of the things we tell them, as you can see, we have like a pro tip. And this is an actual slide out of our playbook. We have a dynamic risk assessment playbook that is out on our team site for people to use. Now, it's updated frequently as we, you know, make changes to our program. If we get enhancements to the tools, we have to update that. But this is an actual slide that we do utilize to make people think about, when they're plotting their risk, what to consider. Consider the time frame. Is it something that could happen in the next month, in the next quarter? We try to make this a you know, what's going to happen in the next year look. We're not, we may call it emerging if it's something we just want to keep an eye on, but what we want to document from an impact and likelihood is, you know, really what's going to happen in the next month, quarter, or year if we didn't have good mitigation activities and controls in place to mitigate those. Any questions?
Another practical tip for this, when you're thinking about likelihood and impact, is to use the residual risk. So it could be that there's a very large inherent risk in a specific area, but your organization already has controls that are in place. So taking that into consideration, it would go from, say, $100 million down to 25 million, because you already have processes, you have controls in place that reduce it to either a likelihood or an impact that is more realistic and practical. So likewise, on the time frame, if in the event a risk were materialized and it would be a substantial impact, so let's say $100 million again, but in the event it were realized, is that actually true? Because it has such a large impact, what would really happen? The organization would likely throw a tiger team on it. And really, you're looking at damages for 3 months and not the whole year. So then you can reduce that down to, say, 30 million to be more realistic for what that likelihood and impact is. So those are the types of considerations to take into place to really understand from a practical perspective what it should be plotted as.
Yeah, and I'm reading a question from Michael Powers. Valerie, if you can get a minute to look at that. But one of the things I also wanted to call out is we're not looking at loss of business, right? We're looking at those fines and penalties. And that is something that we do get a lot of questions about, is because the team will come in and say, oh, well, if we breach this contract, we're going to lose all the sales, you know, within this certain area. But that's not what we look at. We look at the fines and penalties that are, you know, associated to that. Yeah, so it is the unknown, right? How do we know what we don't know? And that's where we try to keep our fingers on the pulse. I mean, you know, with COVID and everything that happened there, that was so completely unknown. And I think that's teaching a lot of us what we need to, you know, think about, you know, moving forward. But we can only solve for what we, you know, what we can solve for right now. Valerie, any thoughts around that?
Yes, I'm going to Jessica's question there about the reference to the Michael Powers book, is that what we do look at is we don't look at the silo just with Dell's experience. We're looking at the macro level. And we actually have a slide on that later too, is to really understand what's going on in the world for hotspots that are being trending that other companies are seeing. So you can get an understanding of what's going on with current events, for example. What is it that you should be aware of that perhaps you're not seeing internally as a risk right now, but being able to take that external view and then having that inform what could be an emerging risk for your own team. So that's something that's important to do too, is making sure that you do have that broader perspective.
Yeah, and I see where there's a question about what falls into each legal impact threshold bucket. As we document here, it's the fines, lawsuits, penalties. So, an example of that would be if there was a recent case like with Microsoft, right? There was a huge anti-corruption type penalties and fines. And then we looked at kind of what they got dinged with and utilized, well, do we need to get better controls in place? Our fine or penalty may be higher because we don't have what they have in place, or they may be less because we do have really good controls in place. Those are some of the things that we look at when we're trying to come up with those thresholds is, what do we have in place to help mitigate it, or where are we lacking? And that highlights the opportunities to put more controls in place. Does that answer your question, I hope? Valerie, anything you want to add to that? Because I know that is a hot topic a lot.
Yeah, so it's the legal side, like Abby mentioned, it's the enforcement, fines, penalties, etc. What we're trying to do is, when we talked about the overarching ERM framework, if there's a business risk, because say you're going to lose opportunity to bid, that would be something to consider, but you don't want to overlap if the business is documenting that same impact and likelihood. So you're trying to look across them. Okay, there's the business risk here, but then there's a legal risk, and then looking at them together and not duplicating the same sort of content.
There's another question I see from Rob about how do you consider reputational or brand risk? We do use risk themes, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes, but we do highlight what are reputational or brand impacts from our risk, which ones, highlight that. And we don't specifically call that out separately. We just highlight that as a tie to that risk is a brand implication. Okay, great questions. Thank you. And I think as Valerie was talking about earlier, is the KRIs and KPIs. And this is, where we're going to in terms of the predictability, how ready are we, how are we tracking this sort of information? And that is something that we haven't really been doing from a tool perspective. And that's where we're going this coming year, is we're going to start putting in our operational metrics that will enable us to see these sorts of areas. Now, Privacy, they did an assessment last year and, have a little bit more robust process around their KRIs and KPIs. And we actually have a workshop next month to kind of roll that out to other legal teams, just try to use Archer to document what those metrics what they want those metrics to look like, and then how they're going to influence the risks themselves. KRIs and KPIs can kind of be a mix, right? Sometimes a KRI is a KPI and vice versa, but we try to, really just stress looking at our operational metrics and what would be an influence to make a risk go up or down, either from an impact or a likelihood perspective. Sorry, I'm trying to read the questions. As opposed to the objective with respect to known or unknowable cost of risk, what is just to control? Which is to control it as cost effectively as possible. Yes, it is. It is as cost effective as possible. So we do utilize smart risks approach, right? We want to make sure we focus on our key things, our low hanging fruit, whatever it is that's going to be the best, to Dell, right? We can't focus on everything. So we always try to take a smart risk approach on all of these issues. So when we rolled this out in 2019, there was a spreadsheet that was sent out to all the teams to say, okay, document your risks in this spreadsheet. And it was a really cool little spreadsheet because it would go in and calculate kind of an impact and likelihood based on, kind of where they put their answers to their questions. But then each of the teams had like 10 or 15 different risks. And we're like, whoa, let's just focus on, those key ones, right? What is it that's going to be key that we need to really keep our eye on, knowing we have all these other risks, and a lot of them are inherent, right? A lot of them are just inherent risks that we have to just, keep a pulse on, but we're really wanting to document and make sure we have visibility to what's being done at the key risk driver perspective. Anything else about that, Valerie, you might want to think about? I'm trying to read questions and do this. Yep.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, going along that point, the intent is not an exercise of cataloging every single risk that you have, like Abby said, no matter how small, but really trying to focus on what are the material key risks that your team is facing, and then making sure that you have those mitigation activities surrounding it.
Here is an example of what our heat map would look like. This is all not real data, as you can see. It's illustration purposes only. But as I don't want to go through read everything on this slide, but it just shows how we can utilize Archer to document and plot these risks. And then there is a calculation, which is a criticality score based on that impact and likelihood that shows the ranking of that risk within the heat map itself. Any questions about that? Okay. What happens after they document this risk, right? Once it's in the risk register and it's plotted on this heat map, then what is that really telling you? So we came up with this this kind of framework that we adopted from E&Y, which shows, depending on where it falls on the heat map, is what you need to do to help mitigate it, right? Do you need to validate? Do you need to improve? So as you can see, anything that's going to be in your top right quadrant is probably going to be something that needs to be improved. Do you just need to monitor, enhance, or optimize, right? So if we see something that's in the lower left corner, sorry, I'm having problems with my mouse. It's maybe just optimize what's going on. It's something that you've got a good pulse on, and you really want to focus on other areas. And that's where you would dedicate your resources. And there's that smart risk approach. Let's focus on really where our key risks are and go from there. So this is what we ask of our team members is, depending on where their risk falls, is to really what needs to be done from a mitigation perspective. Validate, improve, monitor, optimize. Here's an example of our mitigation activities. So within Archer itself, there's two different types of mitigation projects and mitigation programs. Projects are activities that are going to be done within the 12-month time frame. It has a defined start and end date. An example might be create a policy or update a policy or something of that nature. Whereas a program is just something that's a programmatic activity that's done every day, every week, every month, whatever that cadence is, to support that risk. A perfect example of that would be our third-party vetting. When we're onboarding new partners within the Dell framework, we go through a vetting process. So that's something that's just done every day. And so that would be a program. So we document what's being done from a project perspective and also what's being done from a program perspective. Other types of mitigation activities might be remediation. We do have part of our extended team includes remediation. So whenever there's an ethics investigation that highlights an opportunity that's tied to one of our legal risks, they will put in remediation maps, management action plans, just the same sort of level of scrutiny as an audit map is, where we work with the executives to say, there's this issue within the organization and we need you to do ABC. Those same sorts of activities get brought into Archer and get aligned with our risks also. So there are different types of activities that do support our risks aside from just these projects and programs, and that's just another example of that. Okay. Here's our categories. One of the things we do is within the tool itself is we have a category assigned to the mitigation activity. And what that does is it brings visibility to what is being done to support it. And what we do is we try to align that with our remediation efforts. If we're seeing we have a lot of opportunities within a certain area from our remediation or from our ethics investigations or inquiries, if we get inquiries about something, we go look and see where that gap is. If there's a gap that's, around internal controls, whether there's, something, a lack of awareness, things of that activity, we can kind of track, we're seeing issues here and we're mitigating it here. So we can kind of correlate all those different types of categories to make sure we're really focusing on what needs to happen. All right.
And I'll add another comment here. So we take these types of data and put it in metrics that leadership sees. So for example, we can see what is the split between internal controls versus awareness versus culture. Is a lot of the mitigation activity heavily leaning in one category or another? Is that showing that there is one type of area that needs more attention than others, or perhaps we're not deploying enough mitigation activities in one of these other areas? So this gives insight as to the split between the types of mitigation activities that are being implemented too.
Great point. And our decision to utilize Archer was because RSA, who owns the Archer platform itself, was one of the subsidiaries of Dell. So of course we're going to try to use, one of our own internal resources. And it was a decision that came from GATS, our Global Audit and Transformation team, which is our internal audit team. They run the whole ERM process, enterprise risk management process itself, and it was their decision. Now, some teams have adopted it and some teams haven't. We were just looking for something because, as we said, we were using spreadsheets and PowerPoints that we definitely put our hand up to, yes, we want to be a part of that. And so that's why we were part of their pilot. Dell is still working on onboarding other teams to utilize it, but that is something that was driven from the subsidiary role. Even though we've rolled them off, we're still, have contract with them for a few years. So we're still planning on using that.
Right. And so then going back to the intro comments where we have the overarching risk governance framework from the ERM side. So ERM is responsible for all of the holistic enterprise risk management process. Archer is what they're using. And then we were an early adopter of the tool within legal, and then driving some of these capabilities like assigning flags for mitigation activity categories. So developments and capabilities within we find beneficial for us have then been implemented within the tool itself that is being then driven into other functional areas. So we were one of the early adopters. We're helping to define and create how it's utilized. And then as other functional areas start to implement the tool usage within their own teams, then holistically, there's going to be a lot more communication and data being pulled together that's ultimately rolled up. So that's part of what we're helping here to drive is figuring out what's the value add for legal, what is it that we want to see, and then ultimately is benefiting the framework as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Another key area that our group also owns is ethics compares risk-based awareness. So we own our annual training, rolling it out. Anytime there's a key messaging that needs to come out that aligns with one of these key risks, we will do that. And one of the things we've gone to in the past year or so, we've got this resource on our team who's very smart, very talented, very savvy in tools and artistic. And he helps us create microburst learnings. They're very short, to the point, really cool trainings that we can utilize to send to specific targeted groups. Say, in a certain country, we've got this, issue that was highlighted by an investigation or an inquiry. We can engage with creating a microburst on that specific topic, send it to just those, targeted, groups of team members that need it, or we can include it as part of our annual training. But it's better than just putting a PowerPoint deck in front of somebody and say, go read it. It's a great tool. It's able to, do quizzes throughout the tool. You can self-test out of certain areas, but that is something that we've moved to over the past year, and it's been really well received. And we do document and make sure that we are addressing with each of the risk owners opportunities that they want us to help them with in our awareness with team members. Okay, so let's go on. All right, and I think as Valerie was talking about, this is where we were talking about the microenvironment. So Valerie?
Exactly. So going back to the comment that someone brought up before is, how do we make sure that we understand what's coming? And what we want to do is we want to take that holistic approach to leverage and analyze the vast amount of data that's available to us. So we leverage data from leading research and advisory organizations that allows us to better understand the global risk and compliance trends, hotspots that are coming up, and then see how what we're capturing as part of our risk assessment aligns with what other companies are seeing. So here is an example of what we found in Gartner, for example. And this was hotspots that companies are facing currently for the upcoming year. What this does then is make sure that we're not looking at our risks in a vacuum. We're trying to understand external emerging risks, trends, potential impact to Dell business down the road. And then this helps us drive ongoing conversation with our risk leads. That way, when we talk to, say, trade or privacy or IP or whatever it is that has these issues that have been notified, we can say, hey, listen, this is what we understand is going on in this particular practice area. Are you aware of it? Are you seeing anything? And then this can help drive those conversations to have them analyze that, oh, maybe they are actually seeing it. It didn't come to them because it does seem like it's an emerging risk. It's not something that they're dealing with every day, for example. So then when we have discussions with legal leadership, then we can highlight to them and say, oh, actually, our teams are seeing, points number 1, 5, and 7. And then it enables us to understand that we are taking that broader macro view, and then it helps us to drive those further conversations to make sure that we're not blindsided. Okay, next slide. All right, here we go. So here's another practical example of how we use our risk information for discussions with leadership. So as you can see, what we do is we take what's captured in the tool, which is meant to be living information. So primarily the Archer data is continually adjusted. It's not something that we do once a year for leadership discussions. It's something that's ongoing. It's living data. But at the same time, of course, there are cadenced discussions that we have with legal leadership. And when we have those discussions, what we want to be able to do is highlight the information that's in the data tool to drive the relevant discussions that we know leadership wants to know. So, for example, here, what we do is we would prepare a risk heat map that will show all of the risks from the practice areas that we're managing. What this does is it shows what the L2 is, and Abby was talking about that before, the legal categories: competition, trade, anti-corruption, privacy, etc. We highlight the key risk driver with it, which in each of those categories, that would be the L3 level. What is it that's primarily the issue or the concern within that specific practice area? We plot the potential legal impact and likelihood of that risk. And then we show the trending. What was it last year? What was it this year? What is it that we should be concerned about? Is it going down? Is it going up? Is it staying the same? And then we can take that information and then bounce it against the investment that we're making against those risks. So what we do is identify IT funding, for example. Are there key enhancements to our controls and our tools that are supporting the risks that are being implemented? What's the head count for each of these practice areas? And then likewise, what's the outside spend per practice area? So is it outside counsel? Is it, contract services, something of that nature? Because then you can take that data and say, okay, say there's a risk that's really high, but there's really low headcount and there's no investment against it. That might be an adjustment that needs to be made. Or if there's a really low risk with a really high headcount and really high spend, maybe it's time to readjust those resources. So it's taken that holistic view to say, okay, what is the risk, but what are we actually spending on it? Does it make sense? Do we need to redeploy or reprioritize resources in a way to bring down higher risks, or does it make sense how it is? So that's the type of data that we want to show them, because that's exactly what's going to drive the conversations for prioritization of resources, which of course is always a key topic area.
Yeah, and Valerie, one of the questions is, how do you calculate the likelihood?
That's a good question. We have some more information about that as well. So yep, that is something that's always a question with all of our risk leads as well. How do you get these numbers? What we do is we want to take actual data points, both internally and externally. And actually, maybe Abby, we can get to that slide, and then that'll help drive the conversation. So if we go down to say number 21 for now. Okay, so supporting that heat map, we also have risk snapshots for each of the practice areas. And what we do is this gives the rationale and the backup data to support where it's plotted on that heat map. because that's the question that everyone always asks, no matter it's the risk lead, it's the ELT member. Why did we get this number? So there's some guidance that we give to make it a reasonable estimation. Starting at the top, the impact. So the actual dollar value of what we think we would realize if the risk materialized. So looking at corporate penalties in your industry recently, that could be one. What's the enforcement activity? What are we seeing? Is it going higher in one area, lower in the other? Has it been quiet? Has it been speeding up? Which region, etc. Looking at internal ethics investigations. Is this a topic area that is becoming more frequent? Is it going down? What is it that we're seeing in that regard? Are there inquiries from external regulators that are coming in, whistleblower letters? What is it that we're seeing that would drive potentially this risk to actually materialize? And then on the likelihood side, also, what is the number of enforcements in your industry? What is the time frame for that? What are the control opportunities that you're aware of? Is it likely to happen because there's really nothing in place? You don't have a policy in place for this, XYZ issue. So it's probably a higher likelihood than if you had policies, procedures, and a robust framework in place. Those are the types of elements to think about on what is the likelihood of something actually happening. What's the framework that you have in place? What policies, procedures, controls do you actually have currently? Or is it a brand new area? There's nothing in place or very little in place to help prevent or mitigate activity. Then it would probably be a higher likelihood. Does that make sense? All right. So the other item, here we go. So as part of the data that gets reviewed at leadership team meetings are highlights of mitigation activity, because then this will help determine the effectiveness. Where is it that we're putting the resources? Is it driving down the risk? Is it having any impact to what we're saying is a concern for us? So what we do is we highlight those specific activities that are driving the reduction in risk, for example. So this is a way to give a high level understanding of what the mitigation landscape looks like. And then likewise on the next slide, we have supplemental detailed data with regard to the mitigation activity. So this is a dashboard that Abby created actually for the legal team to use, which obviously helps us visualize the mitigation activity. So this is fantastic. They can take a look at it and say, okay, let's look at everything that's going on. You can slice it in a variety of ways. You can slice it by the level 2 risk. So you can see, okay, this particular risk area has 25 mitigation activities, but this one only has 2. You can do it by SVP, so they can see what's within their own realm of responsibility, what's being managed by their team. And then it also gives you information regarding what's a project versus a program. So the top left, for example, shows the projects that were completed or in process of being completed. And then the bottom right shows the number of programs that are being currently implemented to run the business on a day-to-day. It can give you status, of course, in the top right, anything that's coming due that they need to be aware of. They can look at, 30, 60, 90 days, have that time frame available to see what it is that they need to make sure that is progressing. And then likewise, whether it's on track or not. So if something has a due date of, say, January, but we're in December and it's only 5-10% complete, what's the problem? Was there a resourcing issue that prevented it from going forward? And then we can kind of drill down and see, is this something that was reprioritized? So now we should adjust the date, things of that nature. So this is a fantastic tool that our team can help use in our discussions with the risk leads to understand what's going on within their practice area, but at the same time, give the leadership team overarching understanding of what's being managed. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions.
Well, okay, so do you capture in any way the confidence interval and make an estimates of impact and likelihood? There's a difference between a 10% likelihood that is fairly solid estimate and a 10% likelihood that is a wild guess.
Yes, I think that will go along to that risk snapshot slide with the rationale that's documented to say, is there something that you can point to? Or, is it an emerging risk and it's a brand new legislation that just got implemented? There's no enforcement activity. There's no actual penalties. So there's really no estimation as to how it's going to impact your industry, business, in region, or whatever it may be. So that's where it can all get documented and say, okay, this is where we are. This is why we think it makes sense to plot it here.
And then I see Krista asked, how many people do you have managing this process for legal? So actually, Valerie and I are pretty much we manage the process for all of legal, but each of our key risk programs have probably 2 to 3 people that are assigned as, you know, part of the risk management team. The time it takes for them it's not a whole lot. I think more of their time is spent on keeping up with what's happening, right? Keeping up with what's happening and that would impact their risk, keeping an eye on emerging trends, things of that nature. And then they do work hand in hand with the business. I mean, our legal teams are all, you know, assigned to the business areas they support. So they work hand in hand with them. If there's something they need the business to do, I mean, that's just usually if legal says do it, they'll usually, you know, becomes our priority for them. So very much, very hand in hand, you know, sort of information between Valerie and I and the risk teams within legal, but then they work hand in hand with the business themselves.
Yes, so to go along that, so the ethics and compliance team manages the process, the reporting, the dashboard, making sure the framework is in place. But going back to the roles and responsibilities, each practice area has a risk lead and or risk managers assigned that are aware of their risks. So for example, a VP in one of the practice areas would be the risk lead. They would have a couple of risk managers under them who are familiar with the practice area and say, oh, this is the risk that we're managing. They, like Abby said, work with the business to understand, is there something that is an issue or that needs to be mitigated? And then they are responsible for inputting it into the tool. So it's rolled into their area of responsibility. And then the procedural aspect and the operational aspect is in the ethics and compliance team.
Right. And then I see where Jessica asked about when did COVID make it to the dashboard as a metric and how did you track the uncertainties attached? So great question. It hasn't really made it onto our legal heat map. It's more a BCRP, you know, business continuity issue. It was initially tagged because from an employment perspective, because Dell is a government contractor, we were being held to the federal regulations of the vaccine mandate. And when that was lifted, that pretty much, you know, eased that requirement on from the Dell perspective. From, you know, having to meet that. So it hasn't really made it onto our legal heat map, but it is on, you know, probably the rest, the ERM overall heat map. Anything else, Valerie, you could think of related to that?
Yeah, so it's definitely being captured, but like we said before, there's different functions that have different levels of risk with regard to any particular topic area. So it's the overarching view from the ERM perspective to say, where is it impacting all of these different areas, and then combining it all to see what the actual impact of the organization is.
So we're wrapping up here on the end of our presentation, but then I was going to kind of give you guys a couple of minutes to look at the tool itself, but just want to talk about how, you know, I think I already mentioned about the metrics and reporting that we're, you know, trying to move towards with our operational metrics side of the house. And we'll be calculating trend, you know, we'll be able to monitor that trend and probably have more visibility, right? And look at it from that perspective. And then we'll be doing it, you know, as an aggregation. So we can either do it at the operational L3 level, or we could do it at the L2 level. The L2 level will be managed more from the audit perspective. Audit team will manage that from an ERM level. We manage more at the L3 level from that perspective. So I wanted to show you guys really quickly. I have some examples. So we do utilize Tableau and Power BI for our heat map. So here's an example of what our heat map would look like at the L2 level within Power BI. We have the same visibility at a L3 level too. So that's an L2 level. Here is an L3 level. And what our heat maps do is you can utilize, sorry, it has to refresh. You can utilize different types of filters to filter down to what you want to see. One of the examples here is, if we give it another moment. We didn't want that. Let's go see. So if we go down here, we can filter on. So we can take off all our filters. We can put it on. We can do our owners. Our owners would be our SVPs. Who's the manager? Whoever the risk manager is could be on there. What type of category? So different types of areas that we talked about, which would be our risk themes. We can filter based on those. We can do what year. So these are the things that we can do within Tableau. We also have them, which are new in the Power BI side. So Power BI now, we can do it at the L2 or L3 level. We have the same sorts of filtering that can be done by risk owner, risk name, category, which is our risk themes. Any of this can be done from that perspective. But then Archer itself, here is an example of what it looks like, the tool. So when you log into it, we have different, as you can see, as I spoke about, the different levels, uses of Archer, but we use it for the enterprise risk management perspective. And so here's just, this is all sample data of our level risk. So I'll show you really quickly one that I updated. So you click on, these are just a hyperlink to the record, the risk record. And it within that risk record is all the information we talked about, right? Is it, and we can assign it to a region. Is it region specific? We can assign it to a country level. Our category, this is where I was talking about risk themes. So our risk themes are channel. We can say if it's got a, if it's tied to channel risk, if it's tied to a commercial contract or a public contract. Is it ESG related? That's how we would want to see. Is it related to supply chain? Does it have that impact? Those are the sorts of things we can put in the record itself and then provide visibility to through dashboards, heat maps, reporting, whatever you want to do. We have descriptions, we have risk drivers, what's the business concerned about. Here's where we put in our impact and likelihood. And then down below is where we document our mitigation activities. So within the mitigation management tab itself, you can see we've got a program and a project documented. And within that project itself, we can even do a task. And I know we're down to just 2 minutes, so I'll just do this really quickly. You can assign a task to your client, to the clients. And it just tells them, like if we were going to create a policy, we would set up this task, tell them to go create it. They get an email, hey, go create this. When you're finished, come back in, keep it updated for progress. That brings visibility and it brings accountability. We can track, which teams we're, assigning these tasks to. And then within the tool itself, it's a really cool functionality is that you can share. You can create an email for this that is just a hyperlink directly to this record. So it's a really cool tool that allows us to collaborate and do a lot of it itself rather than doing it one-off type things. I know we're at the end of time. I know there's been some great questions. I do know that they're going to give us the list of questions so that if there's something we missed or if there's something you really want to to get more information on, you can reach out to ECI and they can, be in contact with us to let us know. Any other questions? But we really appreciate your time. And, are here for anything you might need. All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Have a great day.